Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment would quite simply restore the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Subcommittee that has been a vital part of this committee's work for the past 4 years. In light of the tragedy of this past weekend, passage of the amendment and the restoration of the Civil Rights Subcommittee would show the American people what this committee stands for, whether we will waste taxpayers' time and money on fishing expeditions or whether we will dedicate ourselves to holding those who violate the civil and human rights of our constituents accountable. Because under the current rules package, if one of our constituents has their civil rights violated or their civil liberties curtailed, this committee offers no place for them to turn. The rules as written send an unmistakable message to the American people that their civil rights and civil liberties are no longer a priority in the 118th Congress as they have been in the past sessions of Congress. I know that each of us, regardless of our political backgrounds, believes earnestly in the importance of civil rights and liberties. So why would we turn a blind eye to their violation? Especially in a time like this, when across the nation, from small towns to big cities, Americans are crying out against the horrible injustice that was perpetrated against Tyre Nichols and so many others every single day. It is undeniable that the civil rights of American people are under threat, and this committee must do something about it. Our Congress has a proud legacy conducting history-making investigations that rally the nation to its most humane resolutions. In 1871, less than 2 years after the passage of the 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote regardless of race, the Ku Klux Klan used domestic terrorism to infringe on the newly guaranteed civil right to vote. And unlike later times where members of the KKK were vigilantes in the 1870s, local officials of all stripes took part in this vile organization. In the face of this brazen attack on American civil rights, the Congress rolled up its sleeves and conducted real investigatory oversight, producing, after a 10-month investigation, 13 pages of reports. The findings of that investigation were the cornerstone on which, after great struggle, the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1875 was built. As the committee charged with oversight and accountability, this is the legacy we inherit, and we owe it to the American people to live up to it. So when over 100 people every year are losing their lives in routine traffic stops, when over a dozen large police departments are operating under consent decrees for violations of their citizens' civil liberties, and when the attention of a nation is focused on the issue of civil rights, it is our duty to rise to the occasion and conduct oversight and provide accountability on this crucial subject and not shriek from this shared responsibility. But without this amendment, that is what passage of the current rules would do. Now, one might argue that Government Ops and Federal Workforce Committee is the right venue to address these issues. Accepting that argument only gives more reason for concern. Of the 5 clauses concerning the jurisdiction of the committee comprise themselves of 18 identified subjects, only one of which could be construed to be used to investigate the tragic circumstances of the death of Tyre Nichols. The current rules package buries civil rights as one of over a dozen charges of that subcommittee, when upholding Americans' civil rights and liberties should be one of the core functions of this committee. It is a question of values, a question of legacy, a question of justice. Let us live up to the legacy of this committee. Let us show the American people that we hear them and we are fighting for them. Let us restore the subcommittee on civil rights and civil remedies. I urge passage, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Let me be very clear. Any topic that's not mentioned in the subcommittee jurisdiction is reserved for the full committee. So we can have a committee hearing in this committee on basically anything we want. I know there are a lot of new members on the committee, so I just want to go back in history a little bit. I requested with Chairwoman Maloney, who I had a lot of respect for, and I think even the members on the other side of the aisle that were on the committee last year would agree we had a very good working relationship. And we worked together, not just Maloney and I, but several members of this committee on bipartisan legislation. Despite what the media says, there's a lot of bipartisan work that takes place in this committee, and there could be a lot more. Last year, Chairwoman Maloney and I and Mr. Conley worked, and Mr. Lynch worked together to pass what I think was the most significant bipartisan bill last year in Congress, the postal reform bill. And we'll have Postmaster General DeJoy before the committee soon to give us an update of how that's going, to see what other improvements need to be made moving forward with the Postal Service, which we have legislative jurisdiction on over here. Chairwoman Mace and Ro Khanna worked together on a lot of cybersecurity bills, bipartisan bills. I worked, former Ranking Member Heiss worked with Mr. Conley on many good government bills to come out of this committee. So there were some bipartisan successes in this committee. But I requested several committee hearings to Chairwoman Maloney to have in this, that would have been and should have been bipartisan. And I'm going to go through these. We were very interested and very concerned about how some of the COVID funds were being spent. But we never had a committee hearing like we're going to have tomorrow to examine the COVID spending. Now, I know the COVID Select Committee, which is a different committee, had some hearings on that. But this Oversight Committee, we never had a single hearing on that. We were concerned about the origination of COVID. And I know there's a Select Committee, but again, there was a little separation between this committee and the Select Committee. I hope that we're closer, and I'm confident we'll be closer next year, because I wasn't on the Select Committee last year. The chairman serves as ex officio on that committee. I think we'll be working a lot closer with that Select Subcommittee next year, or this year, than we did last year. I requested a hearing with the FDA to look at the CBD oil. That's something we're all over the board on this. There's people that support CBD oil, hemp-derived products. There's people that oppose it on both sides of the aisle. That's something that we should have done and could have done, but she refused. And then the last one, and the most baffling to me, something that we'll definitely have very soon in this committee, we wanted a bipartisan hearing on the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers. We had several hearings in this committee on prescription drug pricing, but we never touched on the thing that I think is an area where there's bipartisan support. You agree, Ms. Porter? On the PBMs, we're going to have those hearings in this committee. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to work together. There's going to be opportunities where Mr. Mafume said we will disagree, but I do believe there will be a lot of opportunities to work together. If there are hearings that my friends on the other side of the aisle are interested in having that would have bipartisan support, I'm very open to that. And we're going to meet a lot in this committee. So if you're going to have to work hard to be on this committee, we're going to have a very active subcommittee process. So any topic that's not mentioned in the names or the subcommittee jurisdiction is reserved for the full committee. So I don't believe this amendment's necessary, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it. Does any other member seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that expression of openness to having hearings on a whole range of matters that would bring us together as a committee in interesting ways, and I very much appreciate that sensibility that you have brought to the job, and I'm glad that we are indeed going to begin on COVID-19 relief and some abuses that have taken place under that program. That's certainly something that we pursued very aggressively in the COVID-19 Select Committee, Select Subcommittee rather. But I'm delighted that the Oversight Committee will take it up. Having said that, I do want to strongly support the gentlelady's amendment. The gentlelady from Texas, who herself is a civil rights and constitutional lawyer, distinguished in her field, raises the important point that we had a Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Subcommittee, which just seems to have vanished under the rules. And with Mr. Cummings looking down on us, I feel the obligation to stand in defense of this subcommittee, which I was the first and I guess the only chair of up to this point. I got to serve with Ms. Mace from South Carolina as the ranking member, and we did terrific bipartisan work in that subcommittee on civil rights and civil liberties. But there's an important point that makes this something far more than a semantic issue being raised by the gentlelady from Texas. Mr. Cummings was always adamant that there are two major purposes for the Oversight Committee, and one is to make sure that the laws and programs that Congress adopts actually go to the benefit of the people that they're intended for, and not siphoned off in waste and self-enrichment and corruption and other forms of fraud and abuse. But the other purpose is to make sure that the government is always respecting the rights and the freedoms and the civil liberties of the people in the conduct of its operations. And so the gentlelady raises an important point about our structural focus as a committee. Our subcommittee was able to look at things that brought us together across partisan lines, including certain kinds of abuses in the war on drugs, the treatment of marijuana, governmental seizures and forfeitures that violated the civil liberties of the people. We looked at extremist political violence being led by dangerous extremist groups in the country. We had multiple hearings on that even before the explosion of violence that overcame Congress in the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. So I strongly support the gentlelady's amendment, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Greene.
Thank you. Ms. Crockett, I do agree with you about Tyree Nichols' death. I watched the video, and it was tragic and extremely difficult to watch. I would also like to point out that that city is Democrat-controlled, and the 5 officers that have been arrested and charged are Black. And I think that this isn't an issue of racism or anything like that. I think that the judge and the jury and the trial needs to work out what happened there, but I share that with you. But I'd like to also point something that I'd hope you share with me. There's a woman in this room whose daughter was murdered on January 6th, Ashley Babbitt. And Ashley Babbitt there's never been a trial. As a matter of fact, no one has cared about the person that shot and killed her, and no one in this Congress has really addressed that issue. January 6th committee didn't address it. And I believe that there are many people that came into the Capitol on January 6th whose civil rights and liberties are being violated heavily. And this committee will, I hope, Mr. Chairman, look into those civil rights abuses because they're happening in a jail right here in this city. And I hope Ms. Norton will care about that as well. As well as jails across the country. I've been in that jail. And it's not just the January 6th defendants pre-trial, by the way. It's many of the inmates in there living in horrific conditions. So I think that's something that you and I can care about.
Will the gentlelady yield just for a moment?
No,
Oh.
I will not yield. But I would like to say and point out that civil rights and liberties are important, but we have to make sure that we crack down on the two-tier justice system because that needs to end. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Any further? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I'd like to